Aikido is a fake martial art. I told this to a friend of mine recently, and he didn't like it. He said, the word fake, it just doesn't resonate with me. He doesn't know martial arts, and so I didn't take his words personally, but really he doesn't understand what I meant. When you take the word martial art and you look at its essence, the core noun is martial, war, fighting. The art portion modifies the martial portion, not the other way around. It is a fighting activity that you do artfully. It is not an art activity that involves circumstantially something to do with war, self-defense, or fighting. The core understanding of martial art is fighting. And if you do it really well, if you do it with beauty, with ethics, with consideration, then you can start to call it artistic, a martial art, where you're not just doing the outward of the fighting, which is the foundational meaning, but you're taking it to the inward meaning and making it even a spiritual experience where you are aware of ethics, aware of morals, aware of virtues, or aware of the transcendent, you're aware of the primordial. In that balance of the inward and the outward is the true meaning of martial art. But if you don't have the prerequisite meaning, which is martial, if you can't fight in a literal sense, then when you say you're doing a martial art, you're deceiving yourself. And that is the situation with the wider phenomenon known as Aikido, which is at once a community, a tradition, a culture, possibly even a subculture. And it is a lot of things, but by definition, it's not a true martial art. It's really a fake martial art. And while that is offensive to some people, particularly those who are still involved in Aikido, to the wider martial art world, it's not actually offensive or even controversial to suggest that Aikido is a fake martial art, because we live in an era with film where you can watch literally thousands of hours of martial arts done with no scripting, with large people, with small people, young people, old people. The diversity is amazing, but the evidence is there, and it points irrefutably to the reality that Aikido doesn't work. If it worked, we would see the evidence in the record, the fossil record of film, so to speak, the matches, the sparring, the street fights, and so on. And there's ample evidence. It's not like one or two films and we're choosing to select. There's so much evidence that we can even draw statistical realities about martial arts that even 40 or 50 years ago we weren't really sure on. We can know which types of styles are most effective, statistically speaking. We can know which particular techniques occur at roughly which percentage of fights in general. And then we can even categorize techniques based on their probable efficacy or their likelihood of success based on the mountains of film that we have out there of people fighting. And so when you say that Aikido is fake or a fake martial art, it's not to attack people or to put them down, because within Aikido you'll find really polite people, people who are genuinely concerned with ethics and beauty, and they have these beautiful robes. They really embody the aesthetic of Japanese craftsmanship. Their dojos look, like temples or some type of sacred space, which is something really that martial arts should have. The training areas should have something pointing towards the sacred. But if the fundamental meaning is absent, in this case, it's a community that produces people that regularly and consistently cannot defend themselves, then there's no real premise upon which you can make the loftier claims of martial arts and start to talk about how your spirituality is, so you know, deeply rooted in your martial art tradition, because you don't have a martial art tradition in which to root any of your understanding. It's just conjecture. It's worse than conjecture. You could even call it delusion. And this is where martial artists with that degree of self-delusion unknowingly become charlatans. If I was to sell a sword that broke on its first strike, or a gun with no firing pin, and I assured the purchaser that this was the highest quality of martial art weapon, and then when they go into combat, they find out at the worst of times that their weapon isn't a weapon at all. This would be worse than just having no weapon at all, because you're operating on a false pretense. And because of this, you can categorize the teachers and practitioners and transmitters of Aikido as a form of charlatan. And because it's charlatan, really, you can really understand it as an expression of religion more so than a martial art. Because as a martial art, it is fake, but as a religion, it probably still qualifies. I wouldn't say it's a good religion, but it does have religious qualities. And in line with its religious qualities, it was founded by a man who was instructed by his spiritual guide to teach martial arts as an extension of the religion that that man had formed himself. So it's not a coincidence that it has a religious vibe. This is actually something that its founder talked about openly. He said it was both martial art and religion. On the second point, I would agree with him. It does have religious qualities. But on the first point, his martial art is fake. And therefore, it's not really a martial art, because the definitional quality of a martial art is that you're producing people who can defend themselves, who can fight. And it's not that everyone has to be a world-class fighter or even necessarily a good fighter, but they should be able to do something above baseline. If you take someone the same weight, the same size, and you put him against another person the same weight, the same size, with true training, the trained person should have an advantage over the untrained person. Whereas in Aikido, you'll find basically no difference at all. It's as if they didn't take any training, which means that it's worse than having no training. Because at least when you don't have training, you have a simplified ignorance. You just know that you don't know. But when you think you know and you can't do it, you're walking around making the decisions on a false premise. You're understanding the world in a false lens. And God forbid the day comes that you actually have to fight someone or defend yourself or defend someone else and you're not capable. You're going to make decisions as if you were able to fight when in fact you're not able to fight. And that is a great tragedy. That is a disservice to yourself and to your students and to the people that you confidently told that you were prepared for the task when in fact you weren't. Which really emphasizes, that it's not just a fake martial art, but it's like a religion, and it's kind of a charlatan's religion, because it gives people false hope in something that doesn't exist, which is their martial art ability, and it does it under the umbrella of an aura of spirituality, which promises people that they're the true heirs of martial art excellence. They really do quite arrogantly look down on other martial arts as less sophisticated or less evolved, less spiritually enlightened as them, which is rather ironic considering the degree of delusion that it takes in an age where evidence is ample and you can just go online and start learning what martial arts actually look like in real fighting situations, to just persist in a belief that even though all the evidence points towards an opposite conclusion, you're still just gonna, headstrong believe in what you were taught, which is exactly the hallmark of poor religion. You could even say inappropriate religion, capital R religion, the religion that people tend to look down upon and have a type of cynicism for, because it produces so much internal incoherence and toxicity and different internal problems that really should be avoidable. I heard an Aikido practitioner once, after years of trying to reify it to himself, he really wanted it to be real. He said in an interview, Aikido is the only time I've ever been thrown by peer pressure, because they have such a hierarchical structure and such formality in their lessons, which really are good things when they're done properly. Nothing wrong with beautiful clothes and ritual. But he said it's the only time I've ever been thrown from peer pressure, because he knew in his head it wasn't real, but the social cost of saying, I don't think this is real, or resisting the move a little bit and not playing around with the scripted flow roles that they do, that they delude themselves into thinking is like actual martial arts, that he just went along with it. The peer pressure got to him and he just threw himself, and then he was laughing about this later. But it's not the only time I've come across people who have that internal contradiction when they see the evidence, they think about it deeply, and then they see what's being presented to them in Aikido, which just doesn't add up. And, there's a pretty prominent Aikido practitioner out there who tried to test his Aikido and he got smashed, and he just had to start doing MMA. And the irony of these people doing these things is like a lot of times they're so emotionally invested in their years of training that even when the evidence shows that it's a fake martial art, they spend years more trying to rationalize how it might still have some value, how it might still have some utility, almost like trying to save Aikido from its own ineptitude, which is kind of a tragedy, because when you come across something that you realize wasn't actually real and wasn't benefiting you, just cut it off and move on. cut the loss and move on. There's no need to carry the baggage into the future, but that's the human being. We carry culture that we probably should let go of, and we carry friends that sometimes we'd be better off abandoning, and we carry places and habits and activities that would probably sometimes be better just left in our past. But we have a deep desire not to feel like fools. And it's easier, as they say, to fool someone than to convince them that they've been fooled, even when they've been fooled. And so you'll see people in that community try to rationalize what doesn't actually make sense, because it's very obvious that the art doesn't produce fighters. It doesn't produce people that can defend themselves. But they'll find the most elaborate rationalizations to minimize that or make it sound different than it is. And to someone that really knows how to fight, they sound sort of buffoonish. They sound a little bit deluded or immature, or you could even say arrogant, because it takes a degree of humility to just admit that you're wrong and move on. But a lot of them refuse to do that, and rather tragically, they just keep perpetuating absolutely nonsensical practices under the false umbrella and auspice of martial art instruction, which really it's not. It's a fake martial art. It's a fake martial art practice. And of course, our aim here is not to belittle people or put them down. People are going to do what they want. Let them be. Don't bother people. But at Applied Philosophy, we are very concerned with a proper harmonization of the inward and the outward, which means inwardly we have to take our ethics very seriously, and we have to contemplate very deeply what it means to be a sacred warrior, what it means to be a martial artist, and to take our internal development at least as, if not more, seriously than our external development. But at the same time, we cannot neglect our external development as martial artists and just as people in general. And so that means in this case, we have to learn how to actually fight, not how to pretend to fight. And we have to have discernment and be able to distinguish between reality and falsehood, and then have the bravery, the courage, the honesty to call it out as it is, not to offend people and put them down. If most people were born in the situations that would have led them into an Aikido gym at a young age, they would just grow up doing it and thinking it's normal. Nonetheless, when you see something as falsehood, which really it is, you have to be clear that it is falsehood for the people that don't have the knowledge enough to distinguish, because falsehood deserves to be labeled as falsehood, and truth deserves to be understood as truth.